My name is Ruby Sullivan. I'm 29 years old. And while I was still recovering from a devastating car accident that left me with permanent spinal injuries, chronic pain, and mounting medical bills that threatened to bankrupt me, my parents, Linda and Frank Sullivan, secretly gave my entire $1.1 million settlement to my drug-addicted sister Amber's dealer boyfriend Trevor, claiming they were helping her start fresh and saving the family from embarrassment by paying off her massive drug debts. What they didn't know was that while I appeared broken and helpless in my wheelchair and walker, struggling through painful physical therapy sessions, I had been working with DEA agents and forensic accountants for months to trace every dollar of my stolen settlement money, building a federal case that would expose not only their theft, but also their unwitting participation in a major drug trafficking and money laundering operation that would ultimately destroy their freedom and reputation. Forever. The accident that changed my life forever happened on a rainy Thursday evening in October, when I was driving home from my job as a physical therapist at Seattle Rehabilitation Center, the same career I had chosen specifically because I wanted to help people recover from traumatic injuries and rebuild their lives after devastating setbacks. I had been working late with a patient who was learning to walk again after a motorcycle accident, staying past my scheduled hours, because I believed that extra dedication and personalized care made the difference between partial recovery and full restoration of function and independence. The intersection of Pine Street and 15th Avenue was notorious for accidents during Seattle's frequent rainstorms. But I had driven through it hundreds of times over the past 5 years and never experienced any problems or close calls that would have warned me about the danger I was approaching that evening. The rain was particularly heavy that night, reducing visibility and creating the kind of slick road conditions that make even experienced drivers nervous about maintaining control of their vehicles during routine commutes and everyday driving situations. I was stopped at the red light, listening to a podcast about new developments in physical therapy techniques, and thinking about how I could apply some of the innovative approaches I was learning about to help my current patients achieve better outcomes and faster recovery times. The light changed to green. I proceeded carefully through the intersection, and in the next instant, my world exploded into a chaos of twisted metal, shattered glass, and searing pain that would permanently alter every aspect of my life and future. The drunk driver who ran the red light at 60 miles per hour was behind the wheel of a massive pickup truck that struck my Honda Civic on the driver's side with such devastating force that emergency responders later said they were amazed I survived the initial impact. The collision crushed the left side of my car completely, trapping me inside the wreckage for over an hour, while firefighters used specialized equipment to cut through the mangled metal and extract me from what one paramedic described as barely recognizable as a vehicle. "We have a critical patient with multiple trauma injuries," I heard one of the paramedics saying as they worked to stabilize me before transport to Harborview Medical Center. Though at the time I was drifting in and out of consciousness and couldn't fully process what was happening to me or understand the severity of my condition. Possible spinal injury, internal bleeding, multiple fractures, and significant head trauma. We need to move fast. The weeks that followed were a blur of surgeries, intensive care, medications that made me feel disconnected from reality, and gradually learning the full extent of the injuries that would affect me for the rest of my life. My spine had been severely damaged in 3 places, requiring multiple surgical procedures to stabilize the vertebrae and prevent total paralysis, though the doctors warned that I would likely never regain full mobility or be completely free from chronic pain. "Ruby, I want you to understand that your recovery is going to be a long and challenging process," Dr. Patricia Chen explained during one of our early consultations after the initial emergency surgeries had been completed. "You've suffered significant damage to your lumbar spine, and while we've been able to preserve most of your neurological function, you're going to need extensive physical therapy and may require mobility assistance for many activities throughout your life." The prognosis was devastating, but not entirely hopeless, since the surgical repairs had been successful enough to preserve my ability to walk with assistance and maintain independence in most daily activities, though I would need to use a wheelchair for longer distances, and would probably never be able to return to my physically demanding career as a hands-on physical therapist, working with patients who required manual assistance and support. My left leg had also been severely fractured in multiple places, requiring additional surgeries and hardware implants that would cause permanent limitations in my mobility and ongoing pain that would require long-term medication management and lifestyle modifications. The medical bills were overwhelming, with the initial hospital stay alone costing over $400,000, and the ongoing physical therapy, medications, and adaptive equipment needs creating financial pressures that my health insurance only partially covered. The good news is that your case is very strong from a legal liability perspective, Attorney Michael Rodriguez explained during our first meeting about pursuing a personal injury lawsuit against the drunk driver and his insurance company. The defendant was clearly at fault. His blood alcohol level was nearly 3 times the legal limit, and he has a history of previous DUI convictions that establishes a pattern of reckless behavior. The legal process was lengthy and complex, involving extensive medical documentation, expert testimony about my long-term prognosis and care needs, economic analysis of my lost earning capacity as a physical therapist, and negotiations with multiple insurance companies that initially tried to minimize their liability and settlement obligations. But after 18 months of litigation, depositions, medical evaluations, and settlement negotiations, we reached an agreement that would provide $1 million in compensation for my medical expenses, lost wages, pain and suffering, and the permanent lifestyle changes that resulted from injuries I would live with for the rest of my life. This settlement will provide you with the financial security you need to focus on your recovery and adaptation without worrying about money, Michael explained as we finalized the agreement. You'll be able to pay off your medical debts, purchase the adaptive equipment and home modifications you need, and have enough remaining funds to maintain your lifestyle, even though you won't be able to continue working as a physical therapist. The settlement money represented not just financial compensation, but also the recognition that my life had been permanently altered by someone else's reckless decision, and that I deserved to be made as whole as possible, given the limitations and challenges I would face going forward. The money would allow me to purchase a wheelchair-accessible home, pay for ongoing medical care and physical therapy, and potentially pursue additional education or training that would allow me to work in my field in ways that accommodated my physical limitations. But what I didn't anticipate was that my own family would view my settlement as a resource that could be used to solve other family problems, particularly my sister Amber's ongoing struggles with drug addiction and the financial chaos that her substance abuse had created for everyone around her. My relationship with my sister Amber had always been complicated by the 5-year age gap between us and the dramatically different paths our lives had taken since childhood. But her descent into serious drug addiction over the past 3 years had created family tensions and financial pressures that affected everyone in the Sullivan family. Amber was 24 years old and had been using various drugs since her late teens, starting with marijuana and alcohol during high school, and gradually progressing to cocaine, prescription opioids, and eventually heroin, as her tolerance increased and her addiction became more severe and expensive to maintain. She had dropped out of college after 2 semesters, lost multiple jobs due to attendance and performance problems related to her substance abuse, and had been in and out of rehabilitation programs that she never completed successfully. Amber just needs the right kind of support and treatment program, our mother Linda would say repeatedly, whenever family members suggested that Amber's addiction was a serious problem that required professional intervention and potentially tough love rather than continued financial assistance and emotional enabling. She's going through a difficult phase, but she's fundamentally a good person who can overcome these challenges if we show her love and patience. Our father Frank was equally protective of Amber, treating her addiction as a medical condition that required family support, rather than recognizing the manipulative and destructive behavior patterns that were typical of people with severe substance use disorders who hadn't committed to genuine recovery. Addiction is a disease, not a character flaw, Frank would argue, whenever I expressed concern about Amber's behavior, or suggested that constantly bailing her out of financial and legal problems might be enabling her addiction, rather than helping her achieve sobriety. We need to support Amber through this difficult time instead of abandoning her when she needs her family most. The support that Linda and Frank provided typically involved paying Amber's rent when she couldn't afford it, covering her car payments and insurance, providing grocery money and spending cash, and hiring attorneys to handle the legal problems that resulted from her drug-related activities, including possession charges, theft accusations, and driving under the influence arrests. Over the 3 years since Amber's addiction had become severe, our parents had spent over $200,000 on her various needs, legal fees, rehabilitation attempts, and general financial support, money that came from their retirement savings and represented a significant financial sacrifice that they justified as necessary family assistance during a medical crisis. But despite the extensive financial and emotional support they provided, Amber's condition continued to deteriorate, and her behavior became increasingly manipulative and dangerous as she became involved with Trevor Michaels, a drug dealer who supplied her with heroin and cocaine, while also serving as her boyfriend, and the controlling influence in most of her daily decisions and activities. Trevor was 32 years old with an extensive criminal history including drug trafficking, assault, theft, and various financial crimes that should have been warning signs about the kind of person Amber was becoming involved with and the potential consequences for her safety and legal status. But Amber was so dependent on Trevor for drugs, and so isolated from other relationships, that she defended him against any family criticism and refused to consider treatment programs that would require her to end their relationship. "Trevor really cares about me and understands what I'm going through," Amber would say, whenever family members expressed concern about her boyfriend's criminal background and obvious negative influence on her recovery prospects. "He's the only person who doesn't judge me or try to control my choices." The irony of Amber praising Trevor for not being controlling while he was obviously manipulating her through drug dependency was lost on our parents, who were so focused on maintaining a relationship with their daughter that they avoided confronting her about the toxic dynamics that were preventing any genuine recovery progress. By the time my settlement money was finalized, Amber owed Trevor approximately $75,000 for drugs she had purchased on credit over the previous year, a debt that had grown to include interest and penalties that Trevor claimed were standard in his business operations, but which were clearly designed to keep Amber in a state of financial dependency that prevented her from leaving the relationship. "Trevor is getting impatient about the money Amber owes him," Linda confided to me during one of her visits while I was still recovering from my accident. "And he's making threats about what might happen if she doesn't pay soon. We're worried about her safety, but we don't have that kind of money available in our savings or retirement accounts." The conversation was clearly leading toward a request for financial assistance, though at the time I assumed Linda was hoping I might be able to help with a small portion of Amber's debt, rather than expecting me to solve the entire problem with money that was meant to secure my own medical care and future financial stability. "Mom, I understand you're worried about Amber, but my settlement money is designated for my medical expenses and long-term care needs," I said, trying to establish clear boundaries about my financial resources, while also expressing sympathy for the family's concern about Amber's safety and well-being. But Linda's response revealed that she and Frank had already been discussing my settlement as a potential solution to Amber's debt problem, apparently without considering the impact on my recovery needs or the appropriateness of using money intended for my medical care to pay off drug debts. "Ruby, this is a family emergency, and families help each other during crises," Linda said, her voice taking on the manipulative tone she used when she wanted to guilt me into compliance with decisions I wasn't comfortable making. "Amber could be seriously hurt if Trevor doesn't get his money, and you're in a position to prevent that from happening." The suggestion that I was responsible for preventing consequences that resulted from Amber's own choices about drug use and relationships was both unfair and emotionally manipulative, especially given my own physical condition and financial needs that should have been the family's priority during my recovery period. Have you ever been asked to sacrifice your own security to enable someone else's destructive behavior while being made to feel guilty for protecting your legitimate needs? That's exactly what I was experiencing as Linda tried to convince me that using my settlement money to pay Trevor was somehow my family obligation, rather than recognizing it as enabling Amber's addiction and rewarding criminal behavior. But Linda wasn't finished with her emotional manipulation campaign, apparently believing that she could convince me to voluntarily hand over my settlement money by framing Amber's crisis as a life-threatening emergency that required immediate family intervention and financial sacrifice. "Trevor isn't just some street dealer," Linda continued. "He has connections to dangerous people who don't accept excuses about delayed payments. If something happens to Amber because we couldn't help her when she needed it most, how are you going to live with yourself knowing you could have prevented it? The threat that Amber might be hurt if I didn't pay her drug debts was designed to make me feel responsible for her safety, while ignoring the obvious fact that the best way to protect Amber was to encourage her to enter treatment and end her relationship with Trevor, rather than paying money that would enable continued drug use and dependency. Mom, paying Trevor isn't going to solve Amber's addiction or make her safe in the long term, I replied. It's just going to enable her to continue using drugs and stay involved with someone who's obviously dangerous and controlling. But Linda had apparently already convinced herself that paying off Amber's debt was a reasonable solution that would give Amber a fresh start and the opportunity to get clean without the pressure of owing money to a dangerous drug dealer. If we pay off her debt, Amber has promised to go to rehab and end her relationship with Trevor, Linda explained, though this was at least the 4th time in 3 years that Amber had made similar promises in exchange for financial assistance that never actually resulted in genuine treatment or behavior change. The pattern of promises and broken commitments was so well established that I couldn't understand how Linda and Frank continued to believe that this time would be different, especially when the proposed solution involved such a large amount of money and would eliminate the financial resources I needed for my own medical care and recovery. Mom, Amber has made those same promises before, and she's never followed through, I pointed out. And even if she did go to treatment, using my settlement money to pay her drug dealer isn't appropriate or fair to my own recovery needs. But Linda was becoming increasingly desperate and manipulative, as she realized that I wasn't going to voluntarily agree to her proposal, and she began hinting that there might be other ways to access my settlement money if I continued to be selfish about family needs. Ruby, your father and I have been managing your financial affairs while you've been recovering, Linda said, her tone becoming more ominous. And we have legal authority to make decisions about your settlement funds if we believe you're not thinking clearly due to your injuries and medications. The threat that my parents might use some kind of legal guardianship or power of attorney arrangement to access my settlement money without my consent was alarming and prompted me to immediately contact my attorney to understand what legal protections I had against family members who might try to exploit my physical condition to steal my financial resources. Ruby, your parents have no legal authority over your settlement funds, Attorney Michael Rodriguez assured me during an emergency consultation. You're mentally competent. You're the sole beneficiary of the settlement, and no court would grant them access to your money against your wishes. The legal consultation was reassuring, but also confirmed that I needed to be vigilant about protecting my financial resources from family members who apparently viewed my settlement as a solution to problems that had nothing to do with my accident or recovery needs. What I didn't realize at the time was that Linda and Frank had already decided to take my settlement money regardless of my consent, and they were planning a systematic theft that would transfer the entire amount to Trevor under the pretense of helping Amber while actually funding a drug operation that was under federal surveillance. The theft of my settlement money was executed with a level of sophistication and family betrayal that was both shocking and legally catastrophic for everyone involved, though I wouldn't discover the full extent of their crime until several months after the money had been stolen and used to transform Amber and Trevor's lifestyle in ways that made their criminal activities highly visible to law enforcement agencies that were already investigating their operations. 3 weeks after my conversation with Linda about Amber's debt situation, I received a phone call from my bank informing me that the entire $1.1 million settlement had been transferred out of my account through a series of wire transfers that had been authorized using power of attorney documents that I had never signed or agreed to. Ms. Sullivan, I'm calling to confirm that you authorized the transfer of your settlement funds to various accounts associated with Trevor Michaels, the bank representative said, clearly following a routine verification procedure that was supposed to prevent unauthorized access to large sums of money. I absolutely did not authorize any transfers to Trevor Michaels or anyone else, I replied, feeling panic rising as I realized that my parents had somehow gained access to my settlement money and given it to Amber's drug dealer boyfriend without my knowledge or consent. According to our records, the transfers were authorized using power of attorney documents that were filed with your account when it was originally established, the representative continued. But if you're saying those documents weren't legitimate, we need to freeze the remaining funds and begin an investigation into potential fraud. The discovery that there were no remaining funds to freeze was devastating, as I learned that Linda and Frank had stolen every penny of my settlement and transferred it to Trevor in what they apparently believed was a family intervention that would solve Amber's problems and eliminate the debt that was threatening her safety. But the bank investigation revealed that the power of attorney documents had been forged using my signature from medical forms I had signed during my hospital stay, and that Linda and Frank had committed multiple federal crimes including wire fraud, mail fraud, forgery, and theft from a disabled person in order to steal my settlement money. Ms. Sullivan, we're required to report this apparent fraud to federal authorities, the bank representative explained, and will be cooperating with law enforcement to trace the stolen funds and attempt recovery through criminal and civil proceedings. The federal investigation that followed revealed that my parents' theft was even more legally problematic than simple embezzlement, since they had unknowingly transferred $1 million to a drug trafficking operation that was under DEA surveillance, making them accessories to money laundering and drug crimes that carried serious federal prison sentences. Meanwhile, Amber and Trevor were using my stolen settlement money to live a luxury lifestyle that they documented extensively on social media, apparently unaware that their sudden wealth had attracted the attention of federal agents who were already investigating Trevor's drug trafficking activities. Check out our amazing new penthouse, Amber posted on Instagram, along with photos of a $800,000 luxury apartment that had been purchased entirely with my stolen settlement money. Trevor and I are finally living the life we've always dreamed of. The social media posts were painful to see, but also legally valuable, since they provided time-stamped evidence of how my stolen money was being used to purchase assets that could be seized and recovered through federal asset forfeiture proceedings. But the most infuriating aspect of Amber's social media celebration was the family support she received from relatives who believed her apparent wealth was evidence of successful recovery and legitimate business success, rather than understanding that her lifestyle was built entirely on money stolen from my medical settlement. So proud of Amber for turning her life around and achieving this amazing success. Linda posted on Facebook, sharing Amber's penthouse photos and praising her daughter's supposed transformation, without acknowledging that every dollar of Amber's apparent wealth had been stolen from my accident settlement. The family celebration of Amber's stolen lifestyle was particularly painful because it meant that not only had my parents committed serious crimes against me, but they were also manipulating other family members into believing that their theft was actually a success story that deserved praise and admiration. As Amber continued documenting her luxury lifestyle and Trevor expanded his drug operation using my stolen money, I was struggling with mounting medical bills, physical therapy costs, and the basic living expenses that the settlement was supposed to cover during my recovery and adaptation period. Ruby, I'm sorry about the confusion with your settlement money, Linda said during a phone call several weeks after the theft. But you have to understand that we saved Amber's life by paying off her debts, and now she's clean and building a successful future with Trevor. The characterization of systematic theft as confusion, and the suggestion that funding a drug dealer was somehow saving Amber's life, revealed how completely Linda had convinced herself that criminal behavior was justified when it benefited her favorite daughter. Mom, you stole over $1 million that was meant for my medical care, I replied, and you gave it to a drug dealer. That's not saving anyone. That's committing serious federal crimes while enabling addiction and criminal behavior. But Linda was unrepentant about the theft, apparently believing that the ends justified the means, and that Amber's apparent success proved that stealing my settlement had been the right decision for the family's overall benefit. Amber is doing better than she's ever done, Linda continued. She's clean, she's happy, and she's building a life with someone who loves her. You'll recover from your injuries and make more money, but this was Amber's only chance to turn her life around. The suggestion that my permanent injuries were temporary setbacks, while Amber's drug addiction was a permanent condition that justified stealing my medical settlement, was both medically ignorant and morally reprehensible, revealing the extent of favoritism that had motivated my parents' criminal behavior. Have you ever discovered that your own family viewed your suffering as less important than someone else's problems, to the point where they would commit serious crimes against you to benefit the person they favored? That's exactly what I was experiencing as Linda tried to justify theft and fraud as family loyalty and appropriate parental decision-making. But while Linda and Frank believed their theft had been successful and beneficial, and while Amber and Trevor were enjoying their stolen luxury lifestyle, I was secretly working with federal agents who were investigating the drug trafficking operation that my parents had unknowingly funded with my settlement money. The decision to cooperate with federal law enforcement, rather than pursuing only civil recovery, was both strategic and emotionally necessary, since I needed to ensure that everyone involved in stealing my settlement faced appropriate criminal consequences, while also maximizing the chances of recovering the funds I needed for my medical care and future security. Ms. Sullivan, your case involves multiple federal crimes including theft from a disabled person, wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy, Special Agent Patricia Williams explained during our first meeting. And your cooperation with our ongoing investigation of Trevor Michaels' drug trafficking operation will be crucial for prosecuting everyone involved. The federal investigation revealed that Trevor had been using my stolen settlement money not just to purchase luxury items and real estate, but also to expand his drug trafficking operation by purchasing larger quantities of heroin and cocaine for distribution throughout the Seattle area. Your settlement money essentially capitalized a major drug trafficking expansion, Agent Williams continued, which makes your parents accessories to federal drug crimes in addition to the theft and fraud charges they're facing for stealing your funds. The revelation that Linda and Frank were facing potential prison sentences for drug trafficking in addition to theft was both satisfying and concerning, since I wanted them to face consequences for their crimes, but also understood that serious federal charges would permanently destroy their lives and reputations. But Agent Williams's most important information was that the DEA had been planning to arrest Trevor and seize his assets for months, and that the timing of the arrests could be coordinated to occur during Amber's upcoming housewarming party, when the maximum number of family members would witness the exposure of crimes that had been funded by my stolen settlement. We're going to execute arrest warrants and asset seizure orders during your sister's party, Agent Williams explained, which will provide the maximum educational impact for family members who have been celebrating wealth that was built on theft and drug trafficking. The timing was both strategic and symbolic, ensuring that Amber's celebration of stolen wealth would become the moment when the criminal nature of her lifestyle was exposed to everyone who had been praising her apparent success and transformation. Meanwhile, I continued to appear broken and financially dependent, while secretly working with federal agents and forensic accountants to trace every dollar of my stolen settlement and build the strongest possible case for criminal prosecution and asset recovery. The investigation required careful coordination between multiple federal agencies, including the DEA's drug trafficking investigation, the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and the U.S. Attorney's Office that would prosecute the various criminal charges against everyone involved in the theft and subsequent money laundering activities. Your case is particularly strong because we have extensive documentation of the theft, comprehensive evidence of how the stolen funds were used, and social media posts that show the defendants enjoying the proceeds of their crimes, Agent Williams explained during one of our preparation meetings. The social media evidence was indeed comprehensive and damaging, as Amber had documented every aspect of her luxury lifestyle, including the penthouse apartment, expensive cars, designer clothes, jewelry, and elaborate vacations that had been purchased entirely with my stolen settlement money. But the most important evidence was the financial documentation that showed exactly how my settlement funds had been transferred to Trevor's operation and used to purchase both personal luxuries and drug trafficking supplies that had expanded his criminal enterprise throughout the region. We've traced every dollar of your stolen settlement, forensic accountant David Martinez explained, and we can demonstrate that the entire amount was used either for personal consumption or for drug trafficking activities that constitute federal crimes. The forensic analysis also revealed that Trevor had been extremely careless about separating his drug money from my stolen settlement, creating a paper trail that made it easy for federal agents to prove that legitimate insurance proceeds had been converted into drug trafficking proceeds through systematic money laundering. As Amber's housewarming party approached, and federal agents prepared to execute arrest warrants and asset seizure orders, I felt a combination of anticipation and sadness about the justice that was finally going to be served for the theft and betrayal that had made my recovery so much more difficult and financially stressful. The housewarming party that Amber planned was intended to be the ultimate celebration of her apparent success and recovery, with family members and friends invited to admire the luxury penthouse that had been purchased entirely with money stolen from my medical settlement, while I struggled with mounting bills and limited resources for ongoing care and treatment. Everyone is invited to see our amazing new home. Amber posted on all her social media accounts, along with professional photographs of the penthouse that showcased the expensive furnishings, high-end appliances, and spectacular city views that my stolen settlement money had provided for her and Trevor's enjoyment. The guest list included dozens of family members, friends, and associates who would witness what they believed was a celebration of legitimate success and recovery, rather than understanding that they were being invited to admire the proceeds of systematic theft from a disabled family member. Amber had hired professional caterers, bartenders, and event planners to create an elaborate celebration that demonstrated her apparent wealth and success to everyone who attended, using additional stolen funds to pay for entertainment and hospitality that enhanced her image as someone who had achieved prosperity through legitimate means. "This party is going to be absolutely perfect," Amber told Trevor during a phone conversation that federal agents had been monitoring as part of their drug trafficking investigation. "Everyone will see how successful we've become, and they'll understand that we finally made it to where we deserve to be." The conversation revealed Amber's complete lack of awareness that her success had been built on criminal theft rather than legitimate achievement, and her confidence that the party would enhance her reputation rather than becoming the moment when her crimes were exposed to everyone who had been celebrating her fraudulent lifestyle. But while Amber was planning her celebration of stolen wealth, federal agents were finalizing the arrest warrants and asset seizure orders that would transform her housewarming party into the most humiliating and legally consequential moment of her life. "We have arrest warrants for Trevor Michaels, Amber Sullivan, Linda Sullivan, and Frank Sullivan," Agent Williams explained during our final preparation meeting. "And we have seizure orders for the penthouse, all vehicles, and every asset that was purchased with your stolen settlement money." The coordination between multiple federal agencies was comprehensive and professional, involving the DEA's Drug Enforcement Division, the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, local police, and specialized asset forfeiture teams that would ensure Trevor and Amber's stolen lifestyle was dismantled completely while providing maximum recovery of my settlement funds. On the evening of Amber's housewarming party, I arrived at the luxury penthouse in my wheelchair, still playing the role of the damaged and financially dependent sister, while secretly knowing that federal agents were positioned throughout the building and ready to execute arrest warrants that would expose the criminal nature of everything Amber was celebrating. The party was elaborate and well-attended, with dozens of guests admiring Amber's beautiful penthouse while expressing amazement at the transformation she had achieved through what they believed was successful recovery and legitimate business partnership with Trevor. "Amber, your home is absolutely incredible," said one family friend. "You and Trevor have created such a beautiful life together. You should be so proud of everything you've accomplished after overcoming your addiction." The compliments and congratulations were painful to witness, knowing that every beautiful feature of the penthouse had been purchased with money that was stolen from my medical settlement and was meant to secure my future care and financial stability. But as guests toured the luxury penthouse and praised Amber's apparent prosperity, federal agents were preparing to serve the arrest warrants that would reveal the true source of her wealth and transform her celebration into the most humiliating exposure of criminal behavior that any of the attendees would ever witness. At exactly 9:00 p.m., during the peak of the party when all guests were gathered in Amber's main living area for toasts and speeches, Special Agent Patricia Williams entered the penthouse with federal marshals and local police officers who would execute the arrest warrants and asset seizure orders that would end Amber and Trevor's stolen lifestyle. "Trevor Michaels and Amber Sullivan, you are under arrest for federal charges including drug trafficking, money laundering, conspiracy, and receipt of stolen property," Agent Williams announced, her voice cutting through the party conversation and immediately transforming the celebratory atmosphere into shocked silence and confusion. The reaction from the party guests was immediate and dramatic, with people pulling out their phones to record the arrests while trying to understand why their celebration of Amber's success was being interrupted by federal agents with criminal charges and asset seizure orders. "Linda Sullivan and Frank Sullivan, you are also under arrest for federal charges including theft from a disabled person, wire fraud, mail fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering," Agent Williams continued, addressing my parents who were standing frozen in shock as they realized their theft had been discovered and was being prosecuted as serious federal crimes. The arrests were swift and professional, with federal agents handcuffing Trevor, Amber, Linda, and Frank, while reading them their constitutional rights and explaining the criminal charges that would likely result in substantial prison sentences for everyone involved in the theft and subsequent money laundering activities. This penthouse and all assets purchased with stolen settlement funds are being seized as evidence in a federal criminal investigation, Agent Williams announced to the shocked party guests, many of whom were still trying to process what was happening and why their hosts were being arrested at their own housewarming celebration. The asset seizure was comprehensive and immediate, with federal agents taking control of the penthouse, vehicles, jewelry, and other luxury items while documenting every aspect of the lifestyle that had been built entirely through theft from my medical settlement and subsequent drug trafficking activities. Have you ever watched people who stole from you get arrested in front of everyone they had been impressing with your stolen money? That's exactly what I experienced as Trevor, Amber, Linda, and Frank were led away in handcuffs while their party guests recorded their downfall and shared it with social media followers who were witnessing the collapse of what they had believed was an inspirational success story. The party guests fled the penthouse as quickly as possible, clearly embarrassed about their association with people who had just been exposed as criminals and concerned about their own reputations being damaged by their attendance at a celebration that had been funded entirely through theft and drug trafficking. I can't believe Amber and Trevor were living this whole fake life with money stolen from Ruby, posted one family member who had attended the party. And I can't believe Linda and Frank would steal from their own daughter while she's recovering from a devastating accident. The social media response to the arrests was swift and devastating, with party attendees, family members, and social contacts expressing shock, embarrassment, and outrage about being deceived by people who had built their entire lifestyle on systematic theft from a disabled family member. But the most satisfying aspect of their very public downfall was knowing that their arrests and the seizure of their stolen assets were being documented and shared by hundreds of people who would ensure that their exposure as criminals would be permanent and comprehensive, destroying any possibility that they could rebuild their reputations or continue deceiving people about the source of their apparent wealth. As federal agents processed Trevor, Amber, Linda, and Frank into custody and began the comprehensive asset seizure that would recover every dollar of my stolen settlement while providing evidence for their federal prosecution and imprisonment, I finally felt the justice and vindication that their systematic theft and family betrayal had demanded. The aftermath of the arrests was swift and comprehensive, with federal prosecutors moving quickly to formalize charges, while forensic accountants worked to liquidate seized assets and ensure complete financial recovery for my stolen settlement, plus additional damages for the emotional distress and medical complications that had resulted from their crimes. Your family members have been charged with a combined total of 37 federal felonies, Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Chen explained during our meeting about the criminal case timeline, including drug trafficking, money laundering, theft from a disabled person, wire fraud, mail fraud, and conspiracy charges that carry potential sentences of 15 to 25 years in federal prison. The federal charges were appropriate and comprehensive, ensuring that everyone involved in stealing my settlement and using it to fund drug trafficking would face serious prison time, while also providing maximum financial recovery through asset forfeiture and restitution requirements. Trevor Michaels is facing the most serious charges due to his role as the leader of the drug trafficking operation. Attorney Chen continued, but your parents and sister are also facing substantial sentences due to their knowing participation in money laundering activities and their theft of funds designated for your medical care. The criminal consequences were severe and appropriate, reflecting the sophisticated nature of their crimes and the particular cruelty of stealing medical settlement funds from a family member who was struggling with permanent injuries and ongoing financial needs. The asset forfeiture proceedings have already recovered the penthouse, vehicles, and other luxury items purchased with your stolen settlement, Attorney Chen explained, and we're in the process of liquidating these assets to provide complete restitution plus additional damages for the emotional distress and medical complications you suffered as a result of their theft. The financial recovery exceeded my original settlement amount, as federal courts awarded additional damages that reflected the particular harm caused by family members who had exploited my disability and vulnerability to commit systematic theft and fraud. Trevor was ultimately sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for drug trafficking and money laundering. while Amber received 12 years for her role in the conspiracy and her knowing participation in laundering my stolen settlement money through luxury purchases and lifestyle spending. Linda and Frank were each sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for theft from a disabled person, wire fraud, and conspiracy, ensuring that they would face substantial consequences for their betrayal of family trust and their criminal exploitation of my medical settlement. Your parents will serve their full sentences without possibility of parole, Attorney Chen informed me during our final meeting about the criminal case resolution, and they'll be required to make complete restitution plus additional damages that bring your total recovery to over $1.8 million. The prison sentences were satisfying and appropriate, ensuring that everyone who had participated in stealing my settlement would spend years facing consequences for their crimes, while I used the recovered funds to secure my medical care and rebuild my financial stability. The house I eventually purchased was specifically designed for wheelchair accessibility and adaptive living, with features that would support my ongoing recovery and long-term mobility needs, while providing a safe and comfortable environment for the rest of my life. This house represents more than just financial recovery, I told my physical therapist during one of our sessions in my new home's therapy room. It represents the triumph of justice over theft, truth over deception, and the importance of protecting vulnerable people from family members who would exploit their suffering for personal gain. The contrast between my legitimate home purchase and Amber's stolen penthouse couldn't have been more meaningful, demonstrating that authentic security comes from honest sources rather than criminal exploitation of family members during their most vulnerable times. As I reflected on the 3 years that had transformed me from an accident victim whose family stole her settlement to a strong survivor who had successfully recovered her stolen inheritance through federal prosecution, I realized that the most important lesson wasn't about financial protection or family trust, but about finding strength during vulnerability and using that strength to fight for justice, even when the criminals are people who should have been supporting you. My family's theft had been devastating, and their exploitation of my injuries had been cruel, but their crimes had ultimately revealed their true character and had resulted in consequences that were far more severe than if they had simply respected my medical needs and the legitimate purpose of my settlement funds. The settlement money that was meant to secure my medical care and future stability had ultimately served its intended purpose, though the path to that security had required federal prosecution and family confrontation that the insurance company never could have anticipated when they agreed to compensate me for my permanent injuries. If you're reading this and you're dealing with family members who are exploiting your disability or vulnerability to steal from your financial resources, please know that you have legal rights and law enforcement resources that can help you recover stolen funds while ensuring that criminals face appropriate consequences for their betrayal. Financial exploitation of disabled individuals is a serious federal crime that carries substantial penalties, including prison sentences, complete restitution, and additional damages that can far exceed the original stolen amounts, especially when family members use their positions of trust to commit systematic theft during times of medical crisis and vulnerability. Setting boundaries with family members who exploit your disability isn't cruel. It's necessary for protecting your medical care and ensuring that people who commit crimes against vulnerable individuals face consequences that might prevent them from victimizing others during their most difficult times. Sometimes the most important thing you can do for your own recovery is to ensure that the resources meant to support your healing are protected from relatives who would steal that security for their own benefit, rather than honoring the sacrifices and suffering that made those resources necessary. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share your experiences in the comments below. Have you ever had family members exploit your medical condition or disability to steal from your financial resources? How did you handle situations where relatives used your vulnerability as an opportunity for their own financial gain, while expecting you to remain grateful for their supposed help? Your story might help someone else who's dealing with similar exploitation and needs to understand that they have legal options for recovering stolen assets and demanding accountability from family members who have betrayed their trust during the most difficult times of their lives. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember that your medical settlement and disability resources are worth protecting through whatever legal means necessary, even when the criminals are people who should have been supporting your recovery instead of stealing from your future security. See you in our next story here on Her Sweet Revenge.